Hey guys, this is Caleb with DSLR Video Shooter, and today we're talking about audio levels and where you should set them. This is the first video in a new series that I'm starting here on the channel that I'm going to call something like Video 101. We're going to cover basic stuff that you need to know to make great videos, and today we're starting with audio levels on set and in post-production, where they should be, and there's different levels depending on what you're doing. So to understand audio levels, we need to talk about a metric and how we measure sound, and that is with decibels. You'll also see this often as a little dB after a number. And when it comes to that level or decibel, it is measured on a number line or number scale. So remember these back in school, right in the middle we have 0, and it's going to count up 1, 2, 3, 4 in the positive range to infinity, and also negatively to infinity. So -1, -2, -3, etc. And that is how we're going to measure and figure out our audio levels. There's really two scenarios that are going to dictate where our levels are landing. One is recording sound, so what I'm doing right now, recording sound, those levels, and then there's delivery levels. So once I sit down to edit, what's my audio level going to be before I distribute this video or a film or whatever it is. So let's start with recording audio, what I'm doing right now, recording this video, and I have a microphone hooked up. Where should I have my audio levels land? Well, when it comes to audio on the record side of things, the number one rule is never, ever hit 0 or go above 0 when recording audio. So remember that number scale? We want to be on the negative end. We never want to see that level peak and hit 0 or go above 0. What's going to happen when it hits 0 or goes above 0 is we're going to have audio distortion, which sounds like this. What's going to happen when it hits 0 or goes above 0 is we're going to have audio distortion, which sounds like this. It is very difficult to fix and remove that and should be avoided altogether. So we're going to go down to a level that is comfortable where we have a little bit of headroom, so if someone gets really loud, we're safe. So that level for me is usually -10 to -12. So if you're recording a person like me right now, you want your audio levels to be hovering around that range. You probably don't want to go any higher, and the reason for that is if I get really excited when I'm doing this video, we're not going to go up and hit 0. If you record at -6, there's a chance you're going to peak over. So pick a level that's comfortable for you. If you're in a crazy environment, you might want to drop it even a little further. So back in the day, I used to do interview filming for a living, so documentary style corporate stuff. And what I would do is, as we're getting things set up, whoever is about to be interviewed is usually a little nervous. So I'll just chat with them, and when I'm talking with them, I'm looking at my levels, because I know when they're not being recorded, they're going to act much more normal and probably louder. So I'll check my levels, get it close, and then when we start the interview, usually they get more soft, depending on the person. So that way I know I'm probably safe where I originally set it, and then I'll keep an eye on it. If they get more and more excited and more comfortable and louder, I'll start to maybe drop that down, get it back to that -10 or 11. Another thing I would try to do is try to get them to laugh, hopefully, and say a joke before we get going and see if I can get them to speak or laugh at a somewhat higher level to get a feel for where the peak is going to be to make sure I don't go over 0. When it comes to the levels on your actual recorder or device, most of them will have a couple standard settings like -48, -24, -12, and -6, and then 0. So that'll help you kind of figure out where things are landing there. Now these audio levels that I'm talking about on the recording end is whatever the final record media is. So if you're just recording straight to your camera, you want to get that correct on the camera. If you're using a recorder, you're going to get that correct on the recorder. If you're using a system where audio is going into a recorder and then the camera, you have a little more flexibility, but one of those needs to be perfect, preferably your recorder. And if you're using two things like your recorder and then your camera, you have some flexibility. You might have your camera be a little louder or even quieter than your recorder. That way you have kind of two options for levels. So that is recorded audio. Never go over 0 and try to hover around -10 to -12, being prepared to adjust if you need to. Now let's talk about post-production audio or delivery levels. So where should your audio levels land when you're done with your project and when you're editing? For this, there's kind of two categories. We have distribution to the web and web video, Vimeo, YouTube, this kind of stuff. And then we have other methods of distribution. So going to like services like Netflix, Amazon, submitting your film to a festival, or going into a theater. For all of that stuff, the non-web stuff, there's a lot of guidelines and standards available that you can follow. And there's some of them are very strict. So if you're going to TV, or even services like Netflix, they're going to have very strict guidelines for how loud things should get, and not just your whole video, but things within your video and your project. So you'll want to follow those. For web video, it's kind of the wild, wild west, and we have a lot of freedom, but I would recommend you get your levels as close to 0 as possible for your final project. So these videos that I produce, I try to have them get as close to 0 as possible. The reason for this is it's under 0, so we're not going to have a bunch of distortion, and it is as loud as possible depending on the device that people are listening to. So have you ever watched a video on your phone or your laptop, and even though you've turned it up all the way, you still can't hear things? That's incredibly frustrating. So having your project as loud as possible will ensure that on any device your video will be heard well. So that's the main takeaway, is get it as close to 0 without going over. There's several ways to do that, and we'll talk about that in future videos, but that's kind of what you want to aim for. Is usually I'll look at my timeline, make sure that none of the peaks are going over 0, and usually I'll have them hit -1, so that we kind of have a slight tiny bit of a safety net depending on the device that the video is being watched on. So that is audio levels. On the recording side, when you set up your recorder and your camera, make sure that you're definitely not going over 0 and that you're hovering at around -10, -12. When it comes to post-production and when you're getting ready to deliver your video, if you're sending it to TV, some kind of distribution company, check the guidelines and standards to make sure that your overall sound isn't hitting a certain level, and also that the independent sound effects, dialogue, music, all that stuff is hitting where those guidelines and standards and requirements are. And then finally, if you're going to the web like this here on YouTube, you have freedom, but I would suggest getting as close to 0 as possible so that anyone on any device will be able to hear your voice and your videos very clearly. So that wraps up our first video in this series titled Video 101. Let me know if you guys like this and would like to see more stuff in this series, and if you have any recommendations on things you'd like to have covered. Otherwise, you can watch fresh videos here at DSLR Video Shooter every single week. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.